Welcome to Something About Sleep. We hope you'll let our stories guide you to a nice, peaceful slumber as you learn about history and what it was like to be a human in times long since past. Now, I need to get to sleep, and if you're watching this video, chances are you do too. So, without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, sir. On tonight's episode, we will explore the quiet world of a medieval castle kitchen. So join me here by the fire and rest your weary eyes as I tell you a tale from long, long ago. There is a small mystery hidden behind almost every medieval castle, and it is not usually found in the tallest tower, the Lord's chamber, or the chapel with its painted walls. It is found nearer to the smoke, nearer to the yard, nearer to the place where doors open and close before sunrise. It is the kitchen, not the table where the Lord sits, not the hall where visitors notice the banners and hear the conversations, but the working room behind it all, where a few tired people turn raw winter stores, garden herbs, coarse flour, salt fish, fresh bread, and careful heat into the meals that keep the household moving. Tonight, we're going to step quietly into that world. We will not hurry. We will let the fire come up slowly. We will listen for the scrape of a wooden board, the soft knock of a bucket set down on stone, and the low voice of someone who's been awake longer than the rest of the castle. If you enjoy gentle history like this, you are warmly invited to like the video, subscribe for more relaxing long-form stories, and leave a comment telling us where you are listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It is always a comforting thought that someone may be hearing the same quiet story in a different room, in a different city, under a different sky. Perhaps it is late evening where you are. Perhaps the room is dark except for the glow of a screen, or perhaps the morning has just begun and you are resting before the day. Wherever you are, let this story become a slow walk through a place of work, warmth, and old routine. We are imagining a castle kitchen inspired mostly by late medieval England and by the households whose records, buildings, recipes and surviving objects give us glimpses of daily life. No single castle can stand for all castles. The details varied by century, region, wealth, season and the habits of each lord or lady. Still, the broad pattern is familiar enough to follow. Fire, food, service, storage, washing, counting, and sleep. The castle kitchen was not a quiet place during its busiest hours. It could be hot, crowded, smoky, and full of ordinary urgency. Yet from a distance, and especially at night, it has a strange calm about it. The calm comes not because the work was easy, but because the work was rhythmic. Meals had to appear at expected times. Bread had to be baked. Ale had to be drawn, meat or fish had to be prepared according to the day, the hall had to be served, and after the hall was served the vessels had to be washed, the scraps sorted, the embers controlled, and the doors closed. The kitchen was a room of repetition, and repetition can be soothing when we listen to it across many centuries. It is also a room that reminds us that history is often carried by unnamed hands. Kings and noble families appear in records, but the cook who remembered exactly how thick a sauce should be, the boy who turned a roasting spit, the woman who rinsed herbs in cold water, and the baker who judged an oven by feel, all belong to the hidden life of the place. We will keep our attention on the ordinary rather than the spectacular, because the ordinary is where sleep can rest. A castle kitchen does not need a grand plot to hold us. Its story is in the way heat returns each morning, in the way a wooden bowl waits for the same hand, in the way an herb is bruised and suddenly fills the room with scent. The more slowly we look, the more the old world opens. A door latch, a stack of bread, a barrel in shadow, a servant's footprint in flour. These are small things, but they are honest things. They help us approach history without forcing it to shout. This story is historically grounded, but it is also a guided imagining. Where records give us names, quantities, recipes, buildings and roles, we will use them gently. Where records fall silent, we will leave room for uncertainty. We will say often that practices varied, because they did. A kitchen in a border castle, a royal palace, a manor house, a monastic guest house, and a noble residence could share tools and habits while differing in scale. That variety is part of the charm. Medieval life was not a single picture, but a set of overlapping rooms, each with its own firelight. The word quiet in our title does not mean silent. It means quiet in the way old work becomes quiet when seen from far away. The clatter has softened with time. The heat no longer burns our faces. The urgency has become a pattern we can safely follow. We are listening to labour after the danger and discomfort have passed, keeping respect for those who lived it while allowing the rhythm to become restful. The room we are entering tonight also reminds us how much of the past was sensory. Many records give numbers, names, payments and dates, but a kitchen asks us to imagine heat on skin, smoke in cloth, flour under fingernails, and the small relief of sitting near a wall after work. These things rarely appear in formal chronicles, yet they shaped daily experience as surely as any lord's decision. To follow the kitchen is to follow history through the body. We will also keep our gaze low and close. Instead of looking only at the lord's table, we will notice the lower shelf, the basket, the broom, the cooling pot, the folded cloth, and the servant waiting for a command. This lower angle makes the castle feel more human. Stone walls and towers can make the medieval world seem remote, but a kitchen brings it nearer. Hunger, warmth, tiredness, and the wish for something good to eat are easy to understand across time. There is another quiet mystery here. The kitchen is both ordinary and powerful. It does not hold court, sign charters, arrange marriages, or command soldiers. Yet if it fails, the whole household feels the failure. Hospitality weakens. Rank is embarrassed. Workers grow hungry. Guests remember. The kitchen's power is not the power of display, but the power of necessity. It is the kind of power that works best when no one has to speak of it. So, as the story opens, let your breathing slow with the old rhythm of preparation. Nothing needs to happen quickly. We can let the image form at the pace of a coal brightening under ash. The castle is still distant at first, only a shape against the night. Then the yard appears, then the door, then the stone floor, then the hearth. History does not rush toward us. It warms gradually. A good sleep history should leave room around its facts. It should not crowd the listener with argument. So when we mention a recorded cook, a surviving recipe, or a known household practice, we will let it settle into atmosphere rather than turn it into a lecture. The kitchen can teach without raising its voice. This is also why we will avoid pretending that one perfect reconstruction exists. The medieval past is a landscape of partial evidence. We can walk its paths carefully, noticing where the stones remain and where grass has grown over the road. That carefulness is part of the calm. A slow story like this works best when it trusts small details. The kitchen door, the covered ember, the flower on a sleeve, the distant hall, the careful key in a lock. Each detail is modest, but together they make a world large enough to rest inside. So tonight, instead of following a battle, a royal quarrel, or a storm at sea, we will follow the slow movement of a kitchen day. We will begin before dawn, when the stones hold the night's cold, and the first servant reaches for the ashes. We will look at the building, the hearths, the ovens, the larder, the pantry, and the buttery. We will meet cooks, scullions, bakers, saucers, and officers of the household. We will notice bread, ale, pottage, fish days, spices, seasonal gardens, winter stores, and the quiet passage from kitchen to hall. At the end, when the last light is banked and the household is finally fed, we will let the castle settle into darkness again, For now, imagine that you are standing just outside the kitchen door. The air is cold, the sky is not yet pale. Somewhere in the yard a chain shifts softly, and inside, under yesterday's ash, there may still be a little life left in the fire. Before the rest of the castle feels awake, the kitchen begins in half-darkness. The first sounds are small ones: a foot on a step, the faint complaint of a hinge, the careful movement of someone who knows the room by memory. A servant lifts the latch and enters the kitchen with the caution of habit. In winter, the air may be sharp enough that breath hangs for a moment before disappearing. The flagstones hold the cold of the night. The walls, thick and practical, have kept out some of the weather, but not all of it. There is no modern switch to change darkness into light. There is only the old work of finding light again. The servant may carry a rushlight, a candle, or a coal from another kept fire, depending on the household and the hour. More often, the first task is to look into the hearth, to separate grey ash from darker embers, and to discover whether the fire was properly banked before sleep. A banked fire is a quiet promise. It is not a blaze, it is heat preserved under ash, watched and managed so that morning does not have to begin from nothing. The servant crouches, perhaps with a piece of iron, perhaps with a charred stick, and stirs gently. A dull red glow answers from below. The glow is fed with dry tinder, then small twigs, then split wood or charcoal as the kitchen's needs grow. There is patience in this work. If the servant smothers the ember too quickly, the fire sulks and dies. If the fuel is added too carelessly, smoke fills the room before flame is strong enough to draw. So the first moments of the day have a strange intimacy: breath, ash, spark, and waiting. Long before platters reach the hall, the kitchen belongs to the person who knows how to wake heat from sleep. The earliest kitchen workers also lived by sounds from beyond the room. The bell for prayer might shape the household's sense of time. A rooster might call from somewhere beyond the inner court. A watchman might answer another at a gate. In winter, before the sun, the whole castle could feel like a body not yet willing to move. The kitchen, however, had no such luxury. If bread was to be ready, if pottage was to simmer, if water was to heat, someone had to break the stillness. The first servant may not have thought of himself as important, but in that hour he carried the morning. A castle without a living hearth would wake poorly. Cold food, late service, and irritated officers could follow from a fire neglected at dawn. Even the ash had uses and meanings. Ash could be swept away, but it could also help in cleaning, in managing the hearth, and in preserving embers. Nothing in the kitchen was merely dirt until its usefulness was finished. This practical attention to materials is one of the quiet differences between medieval and modern life. Today we often throw away what seems inconvenient. In the castle kitchen, inconvenience was often turned back into labour. Ash cleaned. Bones made broth or fed animals. Fat became cooking medium or candle material. Stale bread thickened sauces. Small beer refreshed workers. A kitchen survived by noticing the second life of things. Water comes next, because water belongs to nearly every part of kitchen life. It is needed for pots, for washing boards, for soaking dried foods, for brewing, for boiling, for cooling hands, and for rinsing herbs or fish. Some castles had wells within their walls. Some had conduits or access to springs. Some relied on water carried from a courtyard or nearby source. In a large household, bringing water was not a single task, but a continuing rhythm. Buckets, wooden tubs, and heavy vessels might be filled, carried, emptied, and filled again throughout the day. In the stillness before dawn, the sound of water is almost musical. The dip of the bucket, the slosh against wood, the splash into a larger tub. It is easy to forget how much strength lived in these ordinary movements, because the records often count expenses rather than tired arms. Yet without water the kitchen could not become a kitchen at all. The cook, or someone working under him, may arrive while the first fire is growing. In a modest castle, the cook might be close to the work from the very beginning. In a grander household, authority might pass through several hands. Either way, the morning is full of decisions that cannot wait. What remains from yesterday? What has been delivered? Is today a meat day or a fish day? Are guests expected? Has the lord or lady returned with a larger following than planned? Has anyone from the steward's office sent new instructions? Food in a medieval household was not only nourishment. It was accounting, hospitality, status, religious observance and discipline. Before the hall hears a word of it, the kitchen begins sorting these questions into practical actions. Set water to heat, open the larder, bring flour, check the bread, prepare the pottage, sharpen the knives, sweep the board, and send a boy to find more fuel. The servant who wakes the fire may also know the weather before anyone asks. Damp wood smokes differently. A hard frost changes the feel of the bucket handle. Rain in the yard means muddy feet and slower deliveries. Wind may push smoke where it is not wanted. The kitchen reads weather through inconvenience. It does not discuss climate as an abstraction. It meets the day in wet sleeves, stubborn tinder, and the need for more fuel. In this way, the kitchen is close to the earth, even though it stands inside stone walls. The first pot placed near the heat might not be impressive. It could be water, broth, or something left to warm gradually. Yet that first pot changes the room. Steam softens the air. A lid begins to tremble. The kitchen is no longer only a cold space with a fire in it. It is becoming a place where food will happen. That transformation is slow enough to sleep beside. A little light, a little warmth, a little steam, and the day accepts its beginning. A kitchen morning also begins with memory. The servant remembers where the dry kindling was stacked, which pot was left nearest the hearth, how much water remained from the night before, and which task the cook said must be done first. Written instructions were not needed for every action. The room itself held the order of the morning, and the worker's body knew how to answer it. Before the first meal, there is often a moment when no one speaks because speech would be too large for the hour. The servant knows the task. The fire knows the breath. The wood catches or does not. A castle morning is built from such unannounced cooperation between person and material. The world is not yet bright, but it is already being prepared. The hour before sunrise could also be the hour when the castle felt most honest. Decorations were hidden in darkness. Rank slept behind doors. The hall had not yet become a stage. What remained awake was necessity. Someone had to tend the fire. Someone had to bring water. Someone had to begin the first food. The kitchen's dawn is therefore a kind of plain truth beneath the formal life of the castle. It begins with what bodies need. The first worker might move carefully not only because of darkness, but because the room is full of things that can punish carelessness. A misplaced pot, a low stool, a slick patch near the washing area, a tool left where it should not be. All are familiar hazards of a working kitchen. Habit becomes a kind of map. The servant's feet remember where to go before the eyes can fully see. In this way, the room lives partly in muscle memory. As the fire catches, the coal does not vanish all at once. It retreats slowly. First the hands feel it, then the face. Then the air near the hearth changes. The far corners remain cold longer, holding the night inside them. This uneven warmth is important to imagine. A medieval kitchen was not a uniformly heated modern room. It had zones, too hot, too cold, smoky, damp, bright, dim. Workers move between them all day. By the time the sky begins to pale, the first decisions have already become actions. Wood has been chosen, water has been set, a pot has begun its slow work. Perhaps flour is being brought. Perhaps the cook has asked about the day's fish. Perhaps a servant has been sent toward the larder with a key or message. Dawn does not arrive as a single moment. It arrives through tasks completed one by one. There may have been a moment when the first flame finally stood upright, a small, steady tongue of fire, no longer only aglow, but not yet ablaze. In that moment, the worker could trust the morning a little more. Heat had agreed to return. The kitchen's dawn was also full of preparation that made no immediate show. A tub shifted closer, a board wiped down, a knife set where it would be needed. These little arrangements saved time later, when voices rose and several tasks competed for the same space. Outside, the castle is still mostly shadow. The watch may be changing. Horses shift in their stalls. A few birds begin before the sun. In the kitchen, however, the day is already taking form. The fire grows from red to orange. Smoke rises and searches for its way out through the hood, louver, vent, or high opening, depending on the design of the building. A cauldron may be hung from an iron hook. A pot may be placed near the heat rather than directly over it, because the cook knows that not every dish wants the same fire. The room begins to smell of damp wood, warm stone, and yesterday's soot. These are not the perfumes of a feast. They are the first breath of labour. There is comfort in the fact that the day begins in almost the same way again and again, as though the castle itself is waking through the kitchen hearth. As the light strengthens, the kitchen reveals its shape. It is not a delicate room. It has to withstand heat, smoke, water, grease, heavy vessels, hurried feet, and the repeated carrying of food in and out. In many castles and great houses, the kitchen was placed with practical caution, close enough to serve the hall, but sometimes set apart enough that fire and smoke would not threaten the most valued chambers. The exact arrangement varied. Some kitchens stood as separate or semi-separate buildings within the complex. Others were attached by passages, screens, service doors, or yards. The kitchen's position tells us something about medieval priorities. It needed access to deliveries, fuel, water, storerooms, and the serving route, but it also needed to be controlled. Food moved through it, servants moved through it, valuable supplies moved through it. A kitchen was an opening in the household, and openings had to be watched. Inside, the hearth dominates the imagination. Surviving kitchens, manuscripts, accounts, and later reconstructions show us great fires used for roasting, boiling, and keeping heat alive through long hours. A large fireplace could hold spits for meat, while cauldrons hung from hooks or chains. A bake oven might be nearby or in a separate bakehouse, heated by fire and then swept before bread or pies were placed inside. Some rooms had high openings to let smoke escape. Others must have been smoky despite every effort. The floor might be stone, practical underfoot and safer near sparks. Work tables could be simple boards on trestles, moved or cleaned as needed. Nothing about this room exists for display in the way a great chamber might display wealth through tapestries. Even so, a kitchen had its own beauty. Dark beams, glowing embers, iron curves, hanging hooks, rounded ovens, and the worn shine of tools touched by many hands. The roof above the kitchen had to answer the fire below. Smoke might gather in beams, escape through louvers, or blacken rafters over many years. The smell of smoke could cling to clothing, hair, and timber. A person who worked there likely carried the kitchen with them even after leaving the room. This is another way the kitchen marked bodies as well as buildings. A noble visitor might smell of clean linen, herbs, horse, or perfume. A kitchen servant might smell of wood smoke and fat. The castle was a place of visible hierarchy, but it was also a place of scented hierarchy. The body told where one had been working. In some castles, the kitchen's placement near the hall created a useful tension. It had to be close enough for hot food to arrive in good order, but not so close that smoke, noise, and mess invaded the ceremonial space. This tension shaped passages, screens, courtyards, and doorways. The kitchen was both central and hidden. Its work was indispensable, but not meant to dominate the noble experience of dining. That contrast gives us a useful way to understand much of medieval domestic life. The household depended on labour that the household's highest members did not always fully see. A castle kitchen was rarely alone. Around it clustered the smaller offices that made the household possible. The larder held meat or fish, fresh when available and preserved when necessary. The pantry was associated with bread and table service, including linen and trenchers in some households. The buttery handled drink, especially ale, beer, and wine. Its name comes not from butter as a modern listener might first imagine, but from butts, or barrels. The cellar guarded wine and other stores. The scullery was the place of washing, pots, dishes, wooden vessels, knives, and the endless residue of cooking. There might be a saucery, a spicery, a pastry, a bakehouse, a brewhouse, a poultry room, or other specialised spaces in larger establishments. In the grandest households, each office could have its own officers and routines. In smaller castles, the same people might move between several tasks, but the categories still mattered, because they organised responsibility. The kitchen's doorways mattered as much as its hearth. One door might lead to a yard where fuel, animals, water, or deliveries arrived. Another might lead toward the hall. Another might connect to storage. The path from kitchen to table was a route of timing. Food too long delayed could cool or spoil the effect of a dish. Too early, and it would wait awkwardly. Too late, and the order of the household would be disturbed. The architecture of service therefore shaped the meal. We can imagine servants passing through a screens passage near the lower end of the hall, carrying bread, platters, pitchers, or bowls. The hall might be impressive to visitors, but the kitchen passage was the backstage corridor where the meal became a public event. In that narrow movement from fire to table, labour became hospitality. If you walk through the kitchen yard, you might see signs of work before you reach the fire. Stacked wood, baskets, a chopping block, tubs turned upside down, perhaps feathers, straw, empty barrels, or a cart waiting to be unloaded. The yard was part of the kitchen's body. Supplies did not appear magically inside. They arrived through mud, rain, wheels, hooves, hands, and shouted instructions. The kitchen door was a threshold between outside provision and inside transformation. Light entered unevenly. A high window might admit a pale bar of morning. The fire made its own light, restless and orange, moving over iron and stone. Corners remained dim. In those corners stood things that modern kitchens hide: stacked vessels, sacks, tools waiting for repair, perhaps a broken handle set aside, perhaps a bundle of kindling. The room was not arranged for a visitor's admiration. Its order was functional, understood by those who worked there, and perhaps confusing to anyone else. Some surviving medieval and late medieval kitchens feel almost cathedral-like because of their scale, not because they were sacred, but because food service for a great household required height, air, and space. A high roof could help with smoke and heat. A wide hearth could receive several tasks at once. Even when plain, such a room can feel impressive because practicality has been enlarged until it becomes architecture. If rain falls, the kitchen roof speaks softly above the work. Drops strike stone in the yard and darken the woodpile's outer pieces. A servant coming in from outside leaves wet marks across the floor. The cook may complain about damp fuel, but the hearth continues. Weather enters the kitchen not as scenery, but as a practical condition to be solved. The thickness of the walls mattered in ways both practical and atmospheric. Stone could hold coolness in summer and a deep chill in winter. Near the hearth it absorbed warmth. then released it slowly after the fire lowered. This gave the room a delayed memory of heat. A servant passing the hearth wall after supper might still feel the day stored there. Buildings, like people, held traces of what had happened inside them. The kitchen's connection to the yard made it different from more private chambers. Mud, straw, feathers, fish baskets, sacks of grain, barrels and wood all crossed its threshold. It was one of the places where the outside world entered the castle most directly. A noble chamber might try to refine the world with hangings and cushions. The kitchen accepted the world in rougher form and made it usable. This gave it a practical dignity. Ventilation was never a small matter. Smoke that escaped well made work easier. Smoke that lingered made eyes sting and throats tighten. Roof openings, hoods, high ceilings, and placement of fires could help, but conditions varied. We should not imagine the kitchen as pleasantly rustic in every hour. It was a place where comfort and discomfort stood very close together. The same fire that cooked the meal also filled the room with heat and smoke. Still, the architecture of work could be beautiful. A wide hearth blackened by years, a rounded oven mouth, a worn threshold, a stone drain, a beam polished by hanging tools, a courtyard glimpsed through an open door. These features have the beauty of usefulness. They were not ornamental in the modern sense, yet they are moving because they show repeated human action. A worn stone step is a record written by feet. Doorways frame the day. Through one doorway came fuel and food in rough form. Through another went dishes made presentable. Through another perhaps went scraps, ashes, or dirty water. The room was a crossing place, and every threshold had a purpose. The kitchen's plainness could be deceptive. A visitor might see smoke-darkened stone and rough tools, yet every part of the room answered a need. The distance from hearth to table, the place of the oven, the route to water, the nearness of stores, all shaped how efficiently the household could be fed. There is a kind of loneliness in these surrounding rooms after the busiest hours. A pantry without voices, a larder with its hooks and cool shadows, a buttery with barrels lying quiet, a bakehouse whose oven mouth glows faintly after the bread is removed. These rooms were full of use, but they were not usually the rooms where stories were written down. Their history survives in accounts, recipes, buildings, archaeology, household ordinances, and small mentions in larger records. That makes them feel both near and far away. We can stand in a surviving old kitchen and recognise the purpose of a hearth, but we cannot hear the exact joke someone made while lifting a pot, or know whether a particular baker preferred the first hour of the day or dreaded it. The building gives us the outline. Imagination, held carefully within what is likely, lets the room breathe again. A kitchen is not only a room of objects, it is a room of ranks. Medieval households, especially aristocratic ones, were intensely ordered, and the kitchen reflected that order. At the top of the domestic structure stood officers who managed supplies, accounts, service, and discipline. The steward might oversee the household more broadly. The marshal had his sphere. The chamber, wardrobe, cellar, pantry, buttery, and kitchen each belonged to a web of responsibility. Within the kitchen itself, the master cook or chief cook carried skill and authority. He needed to understand timing, ingredients, fire, display, and the expectations of rank. In some records, cooks appear by name, and those names are precious because they briefly pull working people out of the background. English heritage notes Isaac of the Kitchen at Goodrich Castle, cook to Countess Joan, who had to feed as many as 200 people 2 meals a day. That single example hints at a world of pressure, memory and routine. Below or beside the cook were other workers whose titles could vary. A sorcerer, or saucier in later language, prepared sauces, an important task in elite cuisine. A baker managed bread, one of the household's daily foundations. A pantler was connected with the pantry and bread service. A butler looked after drink, especially wine or ale from the buttery. A larderer managed stored meat and fish. Scullions washed vessels, fetched water, cleaned, carried, and did some of the hardest and least honoured work. Young helpers might turn spits, run messages, carry fuel, or learn by watching older hands. The castle kitchen therefore contained both skill and apprenticeship, authority and drudgery. It also contained constant cooperation. A cook could not serve a household alone. Bread had to arrive with meat or fish. Sauce had to be ready with the dish it belonged to. Drink had to reach the hall. Tables had to be set. The whole system depended on timing between people whose names were rarely preserved. Training in such a kitchen was likely more watching than reading. A young helper learned how close to stand to the fire, which cook should not be interrupted, when a pot was too heavy for one person, how to carry a covered dish without losing heat, how to keep out of the steward's path, and how to hear an instruction in a crowded room. Medieval recipes, when they survive, often assume a cook already knows methods, textures, and timing. They can sound brief to modern readers because they were not written for beginners with measuring cups. They belong to a world of embodied knowledge. The real recipe lived partly in the hand. The kitchen could also be a place of small solidarities, a crust passed quietly to a younger servant, a warning that the steward is coming, a shared joke over a stubborn pot, a moment near the doorway to breathe cooler air. We should be careful not to invent too much certainty about private feelings, but every workplace develops habits between people. The medieval kitchen was no different in that broad human sense. Its workers may have argued, competed, helped, teased, and learned from one another, while the formal hierarchy stood around them like the castle walls. For the lowest servants, work could be insecure. A large castle did not always remain equally full. Noble households travelled. Lords and ladies moved between estates. Retinues swelled and shrank. When the lord was away, some servants might be dismissed or receive less work. Skilled officers might have more stable positions, but the young boy carrying wood or the woman hired for extra washing during a feast did not necessarily have such security. We should not make the kitchen too romantic. It demanded long hours, bodily strength, obedience, and endurance. At the same time, it was a place where knowledge mattered. The cook who understood a household's preferences, the baker who knew flour by touch, the brewer who judged fermentation by smell, and the scullion who learned which vessel belonged where all carried forms of expertise. Much of medieval life depended on skill that was not written down. The day also divided people by access. Some kitchen workers might never sit near the high table, but their work shaped what appeared there. They heard news before others did, because supplies, messengers, and returning servants passed through the working spaces. They knew when guests were expected. They knew when the household was short of flour, when a barrel had soured, when a hunter had brought game, or when Lent required a different menu. They also knew the moods of the house. A kitchen learns a household from below. It knows whether the lord is generous with leftovers, whether the steward counts too sharply, whether the lady prefers a certain sauce, whether the baker has been ill, whether the young page steals crusts, whether the winter stores are enough. These small forms of knowledge are not usually called history, but they are the texture of lived time. The cook's authority came partly from pressure. When a meal went wrong, excuses had little value. The hall did not want to hear that the fish arrived late, the fire drew badly, or the young helper dropped a bowl. The cook had to absorb problems and turn them into service. This required not only culinary skill but temperament, the ability to command without losing the room, to improvise without wasting expensive goods, and to remember rank while handling heat. A good cook was therefore a manager of people as much as food. The lower servants learned the castle through errands, one message to the pantry, another to the buttery, another to the yard, another to the hall. A young worker might come to know every shortcut, every stair to avoid with a heavy load, every door that sticks in damp weather, every officer's temper. The kitchen connected the castle's inner map. To work there was to travel the household in small, hurried journeys, always carrying something: a dish, a bucket, a warning, a request, a mistake to be corrected before anyone important noticed. The kitchen staff also lived under the pressure of reputation. A household known for generous hospitality reflected well on its lord or lady. Poor service could embarrass the house. A cook's work therefore travelled beyond the kitchen in the memories of guests. People might not remember the cook's name, but they remembered whether the table was honourable, plentiful, and well ordered. There may have been pride in the work, even when the work was lowly. Pride does not require comfort. A servant might know that he cleaned a vessel well, carried a dish without spilling, remembered an instruction, or survived a difficult feast day without rebuke. Such small forms of competence matter in any century. They are quiet possessions no one can fully take away. The master cook's knowledge was partly social. He needed to know who mattered at the table, which guest required honour, when the household expected restraint, and when display was appropriate. Food could flatter, welcome, or reassure. A cook who understood rank protected the household's reputation. A cook who understood appetite protected the household's comfort. These skills met every day in the same smoky room. For a scullion, the castle might feel less like a noble residence and more like a sequence of chores. Fetch, wash, carry, scrape, return. Yet through these chores the young worker learned the hidden order of the place. He learned who gave orders, who avoided work, who was kind, who noticed mistakes, and which doors opened into warmth. Even low service could become an education in human behaviour. Women certainly worked in food production across medieval society, though the gender balance inside any particular aristocratic castle kitchen could vary by region, period, and household. Brewing, dairying, baking, gardening, poultry keeping, and temporary feast labour often involved women's work in many settings. Because records tend to preserve official male titles more readily, we should be careful not to assume that every working hand was recorded. The kitchen's missing names may include many women whose labour shaped the meal. The workers also shared time differently from the diners. The hall experienced meals as pauses in the day. The kitchen experienced meals as deadlines. A bell, a message, a customary hour, or the movement of officers could turn gradual preparation into urgency. This difference in time is one of the invisible divisions of rank. For some, dinner is arrival. For others, dinner is something that must be made to arrive. Names, when they survive, feel like candles in a dark room. Isaac of the kitchen is memorable partly because so many others are not named. Behind every named worker were many whose identities have thinned into titles, wages, or no record at all. The sleep story can give them quiet attention without inventing too much about them. A medieval kitchen also depended on listening. Instructions had to cut through noise, a cook's call, a steward's message, a servant asking for more bread, the hiss of a boiling pot. All competed. Good workers learned which sounds required action and which belonged to the room's constant background. The cook may have been judged by people who never saw the hardest parts of the work. That is true of many kinds of service. Success appears effortless to those who receive it, while difficulty remains in the room where it was solved. Imagine them now at mid-morning. The cook near the hearth, the baker dusted with flour, the scullion with wet sleeves, the sorcerer grinding something fragrant in a mortar, the boy at the spit blinking against heat, the pantler checking bread, the butler drawing drink, and a servant pausing only long enough to wipe his hands on a cloth before lifting another load. Their work is not a single dramatic scene, but a sequence of gestures. Chop, stir, lift, skim, carry, rinse, count, taste, wait, add fuel, lower the pot, raise the pot, call for a bowl, send for more salt, ask whether the hall is ready. A castle kitchen is made from these verbs. By the time the household notices its meal, the kitchen has already lived a full morning. The old kitchen is a study in materials. Fire is the first, but fire alone is useless without the things that hold it, guide it, and survive it. Iron hooks hang over the hearth. Chains descend so a pot can be raised or lowered. Spits rest before the flames, sometimes turned by hand, sometimes by a mechanism in later or grander settings, but often by labour that required patience more than romance. Cauldrons blacken over heat. Knives shine at the edges and darken at the handles. Wooden boards take the marks of chopping. Mortars receive herbs, breadcrumbs, spices, nuts, or sugar, and pestles answer with a steady hollow sound. Earthen pots sit near the heat, their contents warming slowly. Buckets, tubs, sieves, ladles, basins, cloths, and baskets fill the edges of the room. A modern kitchen hides much of its mechanism inside appliances. The medieval kitchen leaves everything visible: heat, metal, hand, smoke, and time. Cooking by fire is not one method but many. A pot can boil hard or barely tremble. Meat can roast close to flame or farther away. A dish can be kept warm in the edge heat while another takes the centre. Bread can bake in an oven after flames have heated the chamber and embers are raked out. Small items can fry in fat. Pottages can simmer and thicken. Fish can be grilled, boiled, baked in a pie, or preserved and revived in water. The cook's skill lies in reading heat without numbers. There is no thermostat. The signs are colour, sound, smell, the behaviour of liquid, the speed with which fat spits, the look of dough, the resistance of flesh to a knife, the way steam rises. Such knowledge is intimate and practical. It is also hard to record. Recipe collections often tell a cook what to combine, but assume he already knows how to cook. A roasting spit could demand particular patience. The meat had to turn steadily so heat met each side in turn. Too long in one position, and the surface might burn before the inside was done. Too far from the fire and the cooking dragged. Drippings could be caught, reused, or added to sauces. The person turning the spit occupied a humble place in the room, often close to heat and smoke, but the result of his attention might appear at the high table as though it had arrived effortlessly. Much of service is like that. The more carefully labour is done, the more invisible it becomes. The mortar deserves its own little stillness. Unlike the fire, it does not roar. Unlike the knife, it does not flash. It repeats. Press, turn, lift, press again. Almonds become paste. Herbs become green brightness. Bread becomes thickener. Spices become powder. The sound could be steady enough to become part of the room's background, like breathing. In a sleep story, the mortar is almost a clock, not measuring minutes but drawing them out. Fuel shaped the room. Wood had to be cut, stacked, dried, carried and guarded. Charcoal might be used where a cleaner or more concentrated heat was wanted, depending on availability and cost. In a large establishment, fuel consumption was a major matter. Later, Tudor Hampton Court, though beyond the main medieval frame of our imagined castle, gives a vivid sense of scale. Historic royal palaces describes vast kitchens staffed by around 200 people and consuming enormous quantities of wood to feed a royal household. A smaller medieval castle kitchen would not match that scale, but the principle is similar. Feeding many people required forests in miniature, brought indoors piece by piece. Every loaf, every boiled pot, every roasted joint, every warmed sauce had already passed through the labour of cutting and carrying fuel. Water was the partner of fire. It cooled, cleaned, softened, diluted, brewed, and boiled. Medieval cooks used water to soak salted food, to rinse vessels, to make broths, to clean boards, and to manage the constant mess created by flour, fat, blood, fish scales, herbs, ash, and soil from garden produce. The scullery where washing took place must have been one of the hardest corners of the household. Heat made grease move, cold made it cling. Sand, ash, straw, cloth and scraping helped clean what soap could not always easily handle. Knives had to be kept usable. Wooden bowls and trenchers had to be wiped or washed. Metal vessels had to be scoured. When a great meal ended, the kitchen did not end with it. It turned from cooking to cleaning, from flame to water, from urgency to repetition. Knives were valuable in a way that is easy to underestimate. A sharp edge saved labour and improved results. It cut herbs cleanly, portioned meat, opened fish, trimmed pastry, and shaped bread. In some dining contexts, people brought personal knives to the table, while the kitchen also had its working blades. Keeping track of knives mattered because they were tools, property, and potential sources of disorder. At day's end, a missing knife could not be ignored. The quiet counting of tools had a practical seriousness that belonged to the household's safety and economy. Wooden things softened the room. Boards, bowls, handles, buckets, trenchers, peels for the oven, and ladles all carried warmth differently from iron. Wood stained, absorbed smells, cracked and wore down. It had to be dried carefully and replaced when damaged. A wooden board used for chopping onions would remember onions. A bread peel dusted with flour would smell faintly of grain and smoke. These humble materials gave the kitchen its tactile world, a world of roughness, polish, splinters, and familiar weight. Heat was distributed by judgment rather than design diagrams. One corner of the hearth might be right for keeping a pot warm, another for bringing liquid to a boil, another for roasting. The cook's eyes moved constantly between zones of heat. The kitchen was a landscape of temperatures, and experienced workers navigated it as surely as a shepherd knows a field. The kitchen's technology was mostly visible and repairable. A bent hook could be noticed. A cracked board could be replaced. A dull knife could be sharpened. A leaking tub could be mended or discarded. This visible world required attention, but also offered understanding. The worker could see the problem and often knew which hand or craft might answer it. Iron had its own authority in the kitchen. It could bear heat, hold weight, and last through years of use, but it was not effortless. Heavy pots required strength and coordination. Hooks had to be trusted. A cauldron full of liquid was not moved casually. The kitchen therefore trained caution. People learned to respect weight, heat, balance, and distance. Every object taught the body how to behave. Pottery and earthenware belonged to a different kind of care. A ceramic vessel could be useful and ordinary, but also breakable. It might hold sauces, liquids, or stored ingredients. A cracked pot was a small loss. Many small losses became expense. Handling fragile things in a busy kitchen required attention that rarely receives praise. The worker who does not break things may disappear from the record precisely because he did well. Cloth moved everywhere. Cloth lifted hot vessels, strained almond milk, covered bread, wiped hands, wrapped herbs, protected stored food and cleaned surfaces. Linen and rougher cloths belonged to different tasks and values. Some were counted carefully, some wore out in service. A kitchen without cloth would be almost unthinkable. Yet cloth is easy to overlook because it is soft, ordinary, and usually in the background. The sound of water at night differs from water in the morning. Morning water promises preparation. Evening water carries away the day. It clouds with flour, ash, grease, and fragments of food. It cools hands that have been near heat too long. It makes the floor dangerous if spilled. It leaves the room cleaner but the worker wetter and colder. In the kitchen, every comfort tends to bring another task with it. The kitchen's tools made their own small music. iron against iron, wood against wood, liquid against pot, knife against board, broom against stone. None of these sounds was meant as music, yet together they formed the room's daily rhythm. Across centuries that rhythm becomes almost gentle. A worker's hands carried the day's materials. Flour dried the skin, water softened it, smoke scented it, iron bruised it, herbs stained it. The kitchen was known not only by sight but by touch, and the hands remembered what the mind might not have named. There is a restful quality in imagining the tools at the end of the day. The great pot tilted and emptied. The ladle hung again from its peg. The board scraped clean. The knife wiped and set aside. The spit cooling, its iron no longer bright with heat. The tub with cloudy water carried away. The last drops falling from a rinsed bowl. Such objects were humble, but they formed the kitchen's memory. A tool used daily by many hands becomes almost a witness. It knows feasts and ordinary days, Lent and Christmas, lean winters and generous autumns. It knows the cook's impatience and the scullion's tired silence. If the hall is the castle's public face, the tools are the private grammar of survival. Before anything is cooked, it must be stored, and in a medieval household, storage was a serious art. The kitchen day begins not only at the hearth, but behind doors that open into cooler, darker, more guarded spaces. The larder is one of the most important. It holds meat, fish, fat, and preserved foods, depending on the household and season. In cold months, fresh meat could last longer than in summer. In warmer weather, speed, salting, drying, smoking, pickling, and careful management mattered. Hooks, shelves, tubs, barrels, baskets, and cloths all had their uses. The larder was not simply a place to put food away. It was a place where future meals waited, where wealth could be counted, and where waste had to be avoided. A careless larderer could harm the whole household. A careful one could stretch stores through a difficult season. The pantry belonged to bread and the ordering of the table. Bread was not merely a side dish. It was part of the structure of eating. Loaves differed by grain and quality. Fine white wheat bread for those of higher rank when available. Coarser loaves of barley, rye, oats, peas, or beans for lower tables or servants depending on region and circumstance. Thick slices of bread could serve as trenchers, absorbing juices and sauces. Napery, the linen of the table, might also be managed through the pantry in many households. To modern eyes, bread may seem simple, but in the medieval castle it carried rank, routine, and labour. The pantler and baker inhabited a world of flour, counting, cutting, and service. A shortage of bread would be noticed by everyone. The smell of each storeroom would be different. The larder might smell of salt, cool flesh, herbs, smoke, and hanging cloth. The pantry might smell of bread, linen, flour dust, and wood. The buttery might smell of ale, damp barrel, wine, and stone. The spicery, if the household had a separate one, might hold the sharpest fragrances in the castle. Pepper pricking the nose, cinnamon warm and dry, cloves dark and sweet, saffron like hay and honey, ginger clean and hot. A person moving through these rooms could read the household by scent. Wealth had a smell. So did winter. So did work. Locks, keys, and seals mattered. A locked storeroom was not only about suspicion, it was about order. The household needed to know who had permission to take what. In a world where supplies were bought, owed, gifted, harvested, and stored in material form, accountability was survival. A barrel opened too soon could mean a shortage later. A spice used too freely could anger an officer. A missing cloth could become a dispute. The quiet storeroom was therefore also a room of authority. The buttery was the office of drink. Its name can mislead a modern listener because it is connected with butts or barrels rather than with the butter dish. Ale, beer and wine passed through this world of taps, barrels, pitchers, cups and accounts. Ale was a common everyday drink in many medieval settings, while wine, especially imported wine, carried greater prestige and was watched carefully. The butler's responsibilities could be important because drink was both ordinary and ceremonial. A meal without proper drink would feel incomplete. Hospitality required pouring as well as serving. In elite households, the cellar and buttery could therefore be places of trust. Barrels held not only liquid but value. Then there is the spicery, real in some large households and implied in others wherever costly seasonings were kept under control. Pepper, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, mace, nutmeg, saffron, cardamom, sugar, and other imported ingredients did not casually sit open for any hand. They came through trade routes that stretched far beyond the castle's walls, across ports, markets, merchants, and ships. Their presence in a castle kitchen speaks of connection. A pinch of spice in a sauce could carry the memory of distant climates and many transactions. Spices also served taste, colour, aroma, status, and sometimes ideas about health. The old myth that spices were mainly used to disguise rotten meat is too simple and often misleading. In wealthy households, spices were expensive and prestigious. They were used because they were valued, not because good food was impossible without deception. Salt deserves its own quiet respect. It preserved meat and fish, sharpened flavour, and represented value. Too little salt could ruin stores. Too much could make a dish harsh unless soaking and sauces corrected it. Salt connected the castle to mines, marshes, coasts, merchants, and taxes. A pinch in a dish may seem small, but a household supply of salt was part of its ability to pass through winter. The larder, in this sense, held time made edible. The cellar brought another atmosphere again. Cooler, darker, sometimes damp, it guarded barrels and jars away from heat. Wine in particular belonged to status, ceremony, and careful service. A noble household could display refinement by what it poured as well as what it served on a platter. But even ordinary ale required attention. If it soured unexpectedly or ran short, the household felt it quickly. Drink was daily comfort, nutrition, and social glue. The movement of keys may have been one of the quieter rituals of the household. A key taken from a belt, a lock turned, a door opened, a clerk or officer watching, an amount removed, the door closed again. Such gestures made the invisible structure of trust visible. Food was counted because food mattered. The storerooms also held anxiety. Enough looks different in November than in March. A full barrel can be reassuring. A half-empty one can change the mood of an officer. The kitchen workers might not control harvests or prices, but they saw their consequences early. A thin store made itself known in smaller portions and sharper instructions. A storeroom was a place of waiting. Grain waited to become bread. Salt fish waited to be soaked. Barrels waited to be tapped. Apples waited until they softened or spoiled. Spices waited in small, precious amounts for the dish that justified them. The kitchen's future was arranged on shelves and hooks. To open a storeroom was to step into meals that had not happened yet. The larder also reminds us that medieval abundance often looked different from modern abundance. It might not mean endless choice at any hour. It might mean enough salted fish for the fasting season, enough grain until the next delivery, enough ale for expected guests, enough preserved fruit to honour a feast. Plenty was measured against the calendar. A full store was a kind of peace of mind. The pantry's linens and bread service connect food with cleanliness and dignity. A cloth spread on a table changes the feeling of a meal. Bread cut and arranged properly changes the order of service. These details may seem small, but the medieval household was built from such signs. Proper service told diners that the house knew itself. Improper service suggested disorder. The pantry helped protect the face the household showed to others. The spicery, whether a separate room or a locked chest in a smaller establishment, held imagination as well as goods. To open it was to open distant geographies in scent. Pepper suggested long trade. Cinnamon and cloves suggested warm regions beyond ordinary experience. Saffron suggested fields of delicate flowers and enormous labour for a tiny harvest. The castle kitchen, though made of local stone, was not isolated from the wider world. Inventory was a quiet form of storytelling. A list of herrings, loaves, barrels, spices, or cloths can look dry on a page, but behind each item is a planned meal, a purchase, a road, a field, a river, or a hand that carried it. Accounts turn into atmosphere when we imagine the objects they count. The storeroom also made the household think ahead. To take something today was to change what could be served tomorrow. This gave even small decisions weight. The kitchen lived in the present, but the storerooms made it responsible to the future. A quiet store also gave comfort because it meant choices remained. Not unlimited choices, not modern abundance, but enough possibilities for the cook to answer the day. A full shelf could calm an anxious household officer more effectively than any speech. Stores had to be recorded. In large households, clerks and officers watched goods move in and out. Later, Tudorhampton Court offers a vivid example of scrupulous checking and specialised kitchen departments. But medieval aristocratic households also cared deeply about accounting. Food was money in physical form. A side of meat, a barrel of ale, a measure of flour, a sack of salt, a dish of saffron, a jar of honey, or a basket of apples all belong to the household economy. Theft, spoilage, generosity, and celebration all passed through the same doors. At night, some kitchen spaces were locked. English heritage notes that fats from cooking could be reused or made into candles, and that kitchens might be locked to prevent servants taking fat. This small detail is wonderfully human. Fat as flavour, fuel, temptation, and household property. In the quiet storerooms, desire and discipline lived side by side. The grand feast catches the imagination, but the ordinary meal keeps the household alive. Bread is at the centre of that ordinary world. Long before the first guest praises a sauce, someone has measured grain, ground or received flour, mixed dough, judged moisture, kneaded, shaped, heated the oven, watched the bake, and counted the finished loaves. In a castle household, bread came in grades. The ladies' or lord's table might receive finer, whiter wheat bread when supplies allowed. Servants might eat darker, heavier loaves made from mixed grains. Horses and other animals might even receive coarse preparations in some contexts. English heritage mentions John the Baker at Goodrich Castle, who made everything from fine wheat rolls to rough loaves of barley, oats, peas, or beans. That range tells us that bread was not a single food. It was a ladder of rank baked into daily form. Ale also belonged to ordinary nourishment. In many medieval households, ale was made regularly and consumed by adults and children, though strength and quality varied widely. Brewing required grain, water, yeast from previous batches or wild fermentation traditions, vessels, warmth, and timing. It could be household work, estate work, or purchased from others depending on place and scale. The buttery received and managed drink, but the labour of brewing might connect the kitchen to brewhouses, yards, and wider estate production. Ale was not always a substitute for unsafe water, in the absolute way sometimes claimed. People did drink water, especially when it was accessible and acceptable. Yet ale was common, nourishing, and socially embedded. A cup of ale in the hall or among servants was part of the rhythm of the day. The oven created its own rhythm. To bake in a wood-fired oven, the fire heats the chamber first. Then embers may be drawn out, the floor swept, and the bread placed inside to bake in stored heat. The baker reads the oven by experience. The colour of the interior, the feel of heat on the hand, the behaviour of a test piece, the smell when dough begins to change. Bread emerges not as a simple object but as a collaboration between grain, water, yeast, salt when used, hands, fire, and judgment. A failed bake would be more than disappointment. It would disturb the household's day. The ordinary meal also created comfort because it was expected. In a world of uncertain weather and limited light, expectation mattered. People knew that at a certain hour, if all went well, food would come. The meal gathered the household into order. The servants might not eat like the Lord, but they too were part of the daily rhythm. Work paused, resumed, or changed around eating. A bowl, a loaf, and a cup were small anchors in a world that could otherwise be physically demanding and unpredictable. Pottage is another gentle centre of medieval food. It is not one recipe but a flexible category, something cooked in a pot, often with grains, peas, beans, herbs, vegetables, broth, meat if available, or whatever the season and household allowed. For ordinary people outside the castle, pottage might be the daily meal again and again. In a castle kitchen, even with greater resources, pot-based dishes remained practical. A simmering pot could feed many. It could receive leftovers. It could be thickened with bread or grain. It could change with the calendar, leeks in one season, peas in another, herbs from the garden, onions from storage, perhaps a little bacon or broth on a meat day, perhaps fish or almond milk in a more elite fasting preparation. Pottage reminds us that medieval cuisine was not only spectacle, it was warmth in a bowl. Cheese, butter, eggs, milk, beans, peas, onions, leeks, cabbages, apples, pears, nuts, honey, and herbs all appear in the wider medieval food world, though availability changed by region, wealth, season, and religious calendar. A castle could draw on rents, estate farms, gardens, markets, gifts, hunting, fishing rights, and purchases. But even wealth did not erase seasonality. Fresh foods came and went. Dairy might be more abundant at certain times. Garden greens appeared when the earth allowed. Stored pulses and grains carried the household when the fields were bare. The ordinary meal therefore held the memory of the land around the castle. Even imported spices could not remove the fact that most food began nearby. In fields, gardens, barns, dovecotes, fish ponds, orchards, mills, and bakehouses. Grain passed through many hands before it reached the kitchen. It was sown, weeded, harvested, threshed, winnowed, stored, milled, measured, and carried. A loaf therefore held a countryside inside it. The baker might be the final craftsman, but he was not the first. In a sleep history, this is a comforting chain to follow because each step is simple when considered alone. A seed in earth, a stalk in wind, a sheaf in a field, a sack at the mill, flour in a bin, dough under hands, bread in the oven, steam under a crust. Ale also had its quiet stages. Grain steeped, malt dried, mash warmed, liquid drawn, yeast working invisibly, barrels resting. Fermentation is one of the old mysteries people used without needing modern microbiology. They knew signs, bubbling, smell, taste, the behaviour of a batch compared with the last. The kitchen world was full of such practical mysteries, where experience gave reliable answers without explaining everything in modern terms. For listeners drifting towards sleep, bread may be the gentlest image of the kitchen. Dough rises without hurry. It changes while no one watches closely. It asks only warmth, time, and conditions. Medieval bakers did not explain yeast as modern science does, but they knew the living behaviour of dough in practice. They knew when it was sluggish, eager, overworked, or ready. On a peaceful day, the smell of bread could move farther than the kitchen. It might reach a passage, a yard, or the edge of the hall before the loaves themselves appeared. Smell is one of the oldest messengers of food. It announces comfort before the hand receives it. For a tired servant, the scent alone might make the morning feel possible. The difference between fine and coarse bread was not only taste, it was texture, colour, digestibility as understood at the time, and social message. White bread required better flour and more processing. Darker mixed loaves were more common lower down the hierarchy. When bread was placed on the table, status was visible before anyone tasted anything. A loaf could quietly tell a person where he stood. Pottage could absorb the household's small economies. A little leftover broth, a handful of peas, herbs from the garden, an onion, crumbs of bread, a scrap of bacon on an allowed day. Each could enter the pot. Such flexibility made pottage resilient. It is a food of adaptation rather than fixed recipe. In a large kitchen, that adaptability helped transform scattered ingredients into something warm and shareable. Unnamed bread also required repeated production because they did not remain perfect forever. Bread staled. Ale changed. The kitchen could not simply prepare once and rest for a week. It had to renew the basics again and again. This constant renewal is one reason ordinary food deserves attention. The simplest items often require the most faithful labour because they are needed every day. Even the crumbs had paths. Breadcrumbs thickened sauces, fed animals, became part of pottages, or fell into rushes and sweepings. A medieval kitchen used the edges of food. Modern abundance often forgets edges. In the castle kitchen, crusts, drippings, bones, peelings, and stale pieces were part of the household's material life. Waste existed, but usefulness was searched for first. The smell of a coarse loaf may not have carried the prestige of fine white bread, but it could still be deeply welcome. Hunger does not require luxury before it recognises comfort. A rough loaf, warm enough to steam when torn, could be one of the day's truest pleasures. Ordinary food is easy to overlook because it repeats, yet repetition is exactly what makes it historically important. The repeated loaf, the repeated cup, the repeated pot of something warm. These were the foundations on which more memorable occasions rested. Imagine the ordinary meal leaving the kitchen, bread in baskets, a pot dish ladled into bowls, perhaps roasted or boiled meat for some, fish for others depending on the day, cheese or fruit if available, ale drawn and carried, trenchers set out. It is not the banquet of painted manuscripts, but it may be more historically intimate. Most days in a castle were not festival days. Most meals were expected, necessary, and shaped by routine. There is something peaceful in that. The kitchen does not ask whether history will remember this particular loaf. It simply bakes it. The baker dusts his hands, the pantler counts. A servant carries bread toward the hall. And for a little while the household's many ranks share the same quiet dependence on grain, fire, and human labour. In an elite medieval kitchen, meat could appear in great variety, though not equally for everyone and not on every day. Beef, pork, mutton, venison, rabbit, poultry, and game birds all belong to the possibilities of the aristocratic table, depending on rank, region, season, and supply. Some foods that sound unusual to modern ears, such as swan, heron, peacock, or lark, could appear in elite contexts. English heritage records that Isaac of the Kitchen at Goodrich Castle cooked meats including swans, peacocks, larks, and herons, along with more familiar beef, pork, mutton, rabbits, and deer. Such details should not make us imagine that everyone ate extravagantly every day. Rather, they remind us that high-status households used food to express rank and hospitality. The kitchen translated social ambition into edible form. Meat preparation demanded planning. An animal had to be slaughtered, butchered, jointed, salted or cooked, and distributed in ways that matched rank and custom. Roasting before the fire was laborious and visible. Boiling could soften meat, prepare it for pies, or shorten later cooking. Stewing allowed flavours to mingle. Pies preserved heat and created portable, presentable dishes. the cook had to consider not only flavour, but timing and service. A roasted joint that reached the hall at the wrong moment lost some of its purpose. A pie with a strong crust could travel better. Small birds might be served in ways designed to please the eye as much as the appetite. In medieval elite dining, appearance mattered. Colour, shape, number, and order could all carry meaning. The difference between fresh and preserved food mattered deeply. Fresh meat might carry the pride of a successful hunt, the wealth of the estate, or the importance of a guest. Preserved meat or fish carried the wisdom of planning. Salt was not just seasoning, it was technology. Drying was technology. Smoking was technology. Barrels and cool rooms were technology. These older technologies do not look like machines, but they changed what people could eat and when they could eat it. A winter supper was made possible by work done weeks or months before. Fast days also encouraged creativity among elite cooks. Restrictions did not remove the desire for beauty or pleasure. Almond milk could stand in for dairy in certain dishes. Fish could be shaped, sauced, baked, or served with colour. Recipes could imitate familiar textures while obeying the rules as they were understood. The British Museum notes the invention of creative fast-period dishes, including playful substitutes when dairy was prohibited. Such details remind us that rules and imagination often grow together. When one path is closed, cooks find another. Fish days changed the kitchen's rhythm. Fridays were commonly meatless days in much of medieval Christian practice, and other days of fasting or abstinence occurred throughout the year, including Lent and Advent in many contexts. Practices varied over time and place, and not every person followed every rule in the same way, but the calendar mattered deeply. On such days, fish was not merely a substitute, but an entire culinary world. Herring, salmon, eels, oysters, pike, cod, stockfish, and other fresh, salted, dried, or preserved fish might appear depending on access and wealth. English Heritage notes that Goodrich Castle cooks used 24,000 herrings in 3 months, along with oysters and salmon. That number feels enormous, but it makes sense when we remember how many people a major household might feed and how often fish was required. Fish could be humble or luxurious. A simple salted herring might belong to ordinary fare, while fresh salmon or elaborate fish dishes could serve the high table. Fish ponds on estates allowed some households to manage supply. Rivers, coastal trade, preserved stockfish, and markets connected inland kitchens to wider networks. Preparing salted fish required soaking and judgment. Too little soaking left harshness. Too much could weaken texture. Sauces helped enliven preserved foods, especially in winter or fasting seasons. Almond milk, made by grinding almonds and mixing them with water or broth before straining, often appears in elite medieval recipes as a useful ingredient for fasting dishes, because dairy could be restricted. The result is a cuisine far more inventive than the phrase meatless day might suggest. Eels deserve a brief place in the shadows of the kitchen. They were common in many medieval records, valued because they could be kept in ponds, transported alive in wet conditions or preserved. To modern taste they may seem unusual, but to medieval households they were practical and familiar. Rivers, marshes, ponds and fish weirs could all feed the fasting calendar. The kitchen's map therefore extended into water as much as land. The distinction between what the lord ate and what a servant ate could be dramatic, yet both meals came through the same seasonal limits. A noble might receive the finest fish with costly sauce, while a servant received a simpler portion. Nevertheless, both depended on whether fish could be obtained, stored, or paid for. Rank arranged the distribution of food, but nature and supply set the first boundaries. The kitchen stood where those boundaries were negotiated. The fasting calendar also meant that the kitchen looked ahead. Salt fish had to be available before the fast arrived. Almonds, oil, or other permitted ingredients had to be obtained if the household expected richer dishes. The cook could not wait until Friday morning to solve Friday's meal. Religious time became pantry time, larder time, and market time. Some fish arrived as hard-preserved stock, more like a material than a meal until water and time restored it. Other fish arrived fresh and had to be used quickly. The kitchen understood these differences. It did not ask food to be abstract. Each ingredient came with demands. Soak me, salt me, cook me now, keep me cool, serve me with sharpness, soften me with broth. A hunting household could turn the arrival of venison or game into both meal and message. Hunting was tied to lordship, privilege, landscape, and leisure. When game reached the kitchen, it carried that meaning with it. The cook's task was to turn the result of outdoor status into indoor hospitality. The animal had already passed through one ritual world before entering another. Poultry and small birds required different handling from large joints. They could be delicate, numerous, and time-consuming. Preparing many small creatures for an elite dish demanded patience. To modern listeners, some medieval choices may feel unfamiliar, and it is fine to let them remain unfamiliar. History does not need to taste like the present to be understood. It only asks that we notice the logic of another table. Salted fish had a strong presence in the medieval imagination because it appeared so often in fasting contexts. Herring in particular could feed many people and travel preserved. The smell of soaked or cooked herring may not sound dreamy at first, but in a winter castle it was part of the ordinary calendar of survival and obedience. The kitchen turned even this strong practical food into part of a meal with bread, ale, and sauce. The rules of abstinence also created anticipation for feast days. After leaner periods, richer foods could feel more meaningful. Advent before Christmas, Lent before Easter, weekly fish days before meat days. The table moved between restraint and release. The kitchen managed both moods. It knew how to make do, and it knew how to display. This alternating rhythm helped structure the year. The kitchen's calendar may have hung less on a wall than in memory. Workers knew the habits of the week and the approach of holy seasons. A day was not only Monday or Friday, it was meat day, fish day, vigil, feast, fast, preparation, or recovery. Fish days could make the room smell different from the moment stores opened. Salt, brine, river mud, fresh scales, vinegar, and herbs made another atmosphere entirely. The same hearth received the food, but the air told workers what kind of day it was. The calendar gave the kitchen a spiritual rhythm, but also a practical one. A cook had to know whether eggs or dairy were allowed, whether meat could be served, whether a feast interrupted a fast, and what the household expected. Religious observance, health ideas, social display, and appetite all met in the kitchen. A modern listener may imagine rules as rigid, but lived practice was often negotiated through custom, wealth, dispensation, availability, and local habit. The safest way to picture the medieval castle kitchen is not as a place of simple uniform rules, but as a place where the calendar was always present. Today might smell of roasting meat. Tomorrow might smell of soaked herring, vinegar, herbs, and almond milk. The same hearth served both. The fire did not change its nature, but the day changed what the fire was asked to do. Some of the most evocative work in the kitchen happens in the mortar. The sound is slower than chopping and softer than the scrape of iron. A pestle moves in a stone or wooden bowl, crushing pepper, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, grains of paradise, saffron, parsley, sage, garlic, breadcrumbs, almonds, or whatever the recipe and purse allow. The sorcerer or cook is not merely adding flavour, he is shaping a dish's character, sharp with vinegar or verjuice, sweet with sugar or honey, warm with ginger, golden with saffron, green with herbs, thickened with bread or ground nuts, softened with almond milk, brightened by wine. Medieval elite sauces could be vivid, complex and fragrant. They do not always match modern expectations, but they show a cuisine attentive to contrast and colour. The late 14th century English recipe collection known as the Form of Cury gives us one important window into this world. Associated with the master cooks of King Richard II, it includes common and elaborate dishes and reflects influences that move through trade, travel, manuscripts, and elite taste. The New York Public Library describes one manuscript as a collection of medieval English recipes formulated by Richard II's master cooks, with meat and vegetable dishes showing connections with Arabic cooking and Mediterranean influences. The Bodleian notes that the recipes were compiled around 1390 and later published by Samuel Pegg under the title The Form of Cury. Such books do not tell us exactly what every castle kitchen cooked every day, but they reveal what skilled cooks at the top of society considered possible, admirable, or useful. Verjuice, made from unripe grapes or other sour fruit, appears often in medieval and early modern cookery as a gentler acidity than vinegar. Vinegar itself could sharpen sauces and preserve foods. Wine could deepen a dish, while ale might appear in humbler cooking. Breadcrumbs thickened sauces, ground almonds enriched them, and egg yolks could colour or bind when allowed. These techniques gave cooks many ways to change texture without modern thickeners. A sauce could be smooth, coarse, bright, dark, thin, clinging, sweet, sour, or warm with spice. Texture mattered as much as taste. Colour was another language. Saffron offered yellow gold. Parsley and other herbs brought green. Sandalwood or alkanet could give red tones in some elite recipes. Gilding or silvering appeared in highly elaborate contexts. We should not imagine every meal glittering like a manuscript page, but we should allow medieval diners their love of visual pleasure. Food was not only fuel. At high tables it could be art, medicine, symbol, theatre and hospitality at once. Spices were costly. Their journey to an English kitchen could be long, passing through merchants, ports and layered trade networks. This is why their use carried social meaning. Pepper in a sauce, saffron in a dish, cinnamon in a sweet, or cloves in a rich preparation did more than flavour food. They announced access. They suggested that the household could command distant goods. They also connected food to medieval ideas about the body. Learned medicine, influenced by humoral theory, often understood foods as having qualities such as hot, cold, moist or dry. A dish might be balanced or adjusted with ingredients thought to aid digestion or temper another quality. We do not need to enter every medical theory tonight. It is enough to know that taste, health, and status were not separate categories in the medieval imagination. The kitchen garden supplied another kind of flavour. Parsley, sage, hyssop, savoury, mint, fennel, leeks, onions, garlic, and other herbs or alliums could bring freshness that imported spices could not provide. Some herbs were culinary, some medicinal, and many moved between uses. The garden's nearness contrasted with the spice chest's distance. One ingredient arrived from the bed outside the wall, another from across seas. Together, they entered the same sauce. A cook might pound green herbs with vinegar, strain almond milk, thicken broth with bread, or make a sharp accompaniment for fish. The sorcerer's work could be especially important when the main ingredient was preserved, salted, or otherwise plain. Sauce made the stored food speak. Sugar in the medieval elite kitchen was not the ordinary cupboard item it is now. It was costly, often treated with qualities that overlapped food and medicine, and used in preparations that could signal refinement. Honey remained important as a sweetener, but sugar had prestige. A sweet dish or sweetened sauce could therefore carry the pleasure of rarity. The cook had to know when sweetness belonged, and when it would seem excessive. Taste was learned within a culture, and medieval high-status taste enjoyed combinations that may feel unexpected to us now. Almonds appear again and again in elite medieval cooking because they were versatile. Ground and strained, they made almond milk. Pounded, they thickened and enriched. Combined with sugar, they could become delicate pastes or decorative forms. During fasting periods, almond milk could help create dishes that felt rich without using dairy. In the mortar, an almond changed identity. From nut to milk, from texture to body, from imported ingredient to culinary solution. The act of straining appears often in old cookery. A mixture is ground, softened with liquid, pressed through cloth or sieve, and transformed from rough substance into smooth sauce or milk. Straining is a patient action. It removes haste from the hand. Drop by drop, pressure by pressure, the cook makes texture elegant. In the dim kitchen, this could be one of the quieter arts. A kitchen worker who handled spices might remember their colours on the fingers. Saffron could stain. Pepper could cling. Cinnamon dust could rise. These costly powders were not merely ideas in a trade network. They were physical, fragrant, and fragile. A careless gust, a damp spoon, or an overturned dish could waste what many miles had carried. Medieval taste could value sharpness in ways modern comfort food sometimes avoids. Vinegar, verjuice, mustard, and sour fruit could wake a dish, especially one based on preserved meat or fish. Sharpness cut richness. Sweetness softened sharpness. Spice warmed both. The best sauces were not random mixtures but balanced compositions according to the taste and theory of the time. They were small acts of culinary intelligence. Mustard was another important flavour, sometimes prepared in ways that could be powerful and immediate. Ground mustard seed mixed with liquid made a sauce that could accompany meat or fish. Like many condiments, it allowed simple food to become more lively. It also belonged to a world where sauces were not optional extras but central parts of elite cooking. A dish might be defined as much by its sauce as by its main ingredient. The form of curry and other medieval recipe collections often leave quantities vague by modern standards. They may say to take good broth, add spices, colour it, boil it, serve it forth. This is not carelessness. It reflects a readership of trained cooks who already knew proportions by practice. The written recipe is a reminder, not a complete lesson. The complete lesson happened in kitchens through watching and doing. Aromatic ingredients also changed the emotional atmosphere of the kitchen. The smell of cinnamon or ginger could announce that this was not an ordinary pot. Saffron could signal care before the dish was tasted. Herbs bruised under a knife could make a cold morning feel briefly green. These scents travelled faster than words. They told workers what kind of meal was forming. A sauce could rescue plainness without pretending the ingredient was something else. This is an important distinction. Medieval cooks were not merely covering food, they were completing it according to their own cuisine. The sauce belonged to the dish as much as the main ingredient did. The mortar's work could pass from strong to delicate in the same hour. Garlic or mustard might strike the nose. Almonds might soften into pale richness. Saffron might offer colour from only a small amount. The kitchen's palate was sensory long before it was written in a recipe. It is pleasant to imagine the smells changing through the day. Morning smoke and bread. Midday broth and roasting fat. Afternoon vinegar, herbs, and spice. Sweet dishes with honey or sugar on a special occasion. A pot of almond milk thickened for a fasting day. The tiny luxury of saffron staining a dish gold. In the dimness of the kitchen, colour mattered. Medieval elite cookery sometimes delighted in red, yellow, green, gilded, or otherwise striking foods. The table was meant to be seen as well as tasted. But behind the display was the patient hand grinding, mixing, straining, tasting, and adjusting. A sauce is a quiet argument that small things matter. A few grains, a leaf, a splash, a pinch, a little more heat, a little more time, and suddenly a dish belongs to a household, a season, and a remembered way of eating. When the food is ready, the kitchen changes from making to sending. The hall is waiting, and the distance between hearth and table becomes important. The great hall was one of the central spaces of a castle household. It was where meals, announcements, hospitality and hierarchy could be displayed. At the high table sat the lord, lady, honoured guests, or officers of rank, depending on the occasion. Lower tables held other members of the household. Servants moved through the space with practised awareness of order. Food from the kitchen did not simply arrive, it was presented through a system. The pantler, butler, steward, servers, and kitchen staff all contributed to the visible calm of the meal. The better they did their work, the less the diners needed to notice the labour behind it. The route might pass through a serving place, screens passage, or service doors near the lower end of the hall. Bread, drink, dishes, trenchers, knives, and cloth had to be coordinated. The hall itself could be noisy, but we can listen instead to the quieter edge of the process. A servant pausing before entering, adjusting grip on a platter, another waiting with a pitcher, someone checking whether the next dish should go forward, a boy sent back for more bread, a cook asking whether the high table has been served. Timing is everything. A dish that seems simple on the table may represent a dozen small acts performed in the right order. The great hall itself had its own atmosphere. Rushes or other floor coverings might soften the ground. Trestle tables could be set up and taken down. Benches, boards, cloth, salt containers, cups and knives all had places. The smell of food mixed with smoke from a central hearth or fireplace, damp wool, dogs, leather, wood and people. Wood. The hall was public compared with the kitchen, but it was not modern formal silence. It was a living room of the household in the older sense, a place where many functions met. The kitchen served into that living order. The phrase high table can sound simple, but it represented a whole social map. Nearness to the lord, quality of food, type of bread, access to wine, and order of service all expressed rank. The kitchen had to understand this map without needing it explained each time. A platter sent to the wrong place was not only a logistical mistake, it could disturb the grammar of hierarchy. Food moved through the household with meaning attached to it. Meals were often fewer and earlier than many modern schedules. Dinner might be served around late morning or midday, and supper later in the afternoon or early evening, though timing varied by household and period. The kitchen therefore worked toward peaks rather than constant restaurant-style service. Before a meal, the room climbed into urgency. During service, it emptied and refilled in waves. After service, it exhaled into cleaning, sorting, and preparation for the next round. This rise and fall gave the kitchen its daily tide. The hall saw the crest. The kitchen felt the whole sea. Hierarchy followed the food. Better bread, better cuts, more delicate sauces, and imported wine might move to higher tables. Coarser bread, simpler drink, and less prestigious portions might go elsewhere. Yet everyone depended on the same system. The castle household was not equal, but it was interconnected. A lord's feast required scullions. A servant's supper depended on the same ovens that baked fine rolls. Leftovers, broken bread, bones, and scraps moved into further uses. Alms, servants' portions, animal feed, stock, or waste, depending on custom and circumstance. The journey of food did not end at the first table it reached. It continued through the social body of the household. Serving required physical grace. A full platter is heavy. A pitcher can slosh. A bowl can burn the hand through cloth. A crowded passage can ruin careful work in a heartbeat. Servants had to move quickly without looking rushed, attentively without appearing intrusive. The hall's dignity depended on their bodies. In this sense, service was a performance of control. The kitchen prepared food, but the servers carried the household's composure into public view. At the lower end of the hall, servants and lesser members of the household might be closer to the service doors and the practical noise of movement. At the upper end, rank created distance from that work, yet sound travels. A person at the high table may still have heard the clatter of dishes, the murmur from the screen's passage, or the call for more bread. The boundary between ceremony and labour was real, but never complete. The passage to the hall was also a passage from smell to sight. In the kitchen, food was known through smoke, steam, and the closeness of preparation. In the hall, it became arrangement. Dishes set down, portions revealed, colours noticed, rank observed. The same food had two lives, one intimate and one public. When the hall meal ends, echoes come back before dishes do. Benches scrape, voices loosen, dogs may stir. Servants begin returning with platters, cups, trenchers, and instructions. The kitchen receives the hall's aftermath like a tide returning to shore. What went out arranged and hopeful comes back mixed, cooled, and ready for sorting. The servants who carried food occupied a delicate middle space. They were not the makers in the deepest kitchen sense, and they were not the diners in the honoured sense. They moved between worlds. They saw the kitchen's smoke and the hall's display. They knew whether a dish had been difficult before it became admired. Their steps connected hidden labour to public ceremony. The table setting itself could be temporary. Boards on trestles might be arranged for meals and removed afterward in many halls. This made dining an event assembled and disassembled rather than a permanent room arrangement. The kitchen's timing therefore included furniture, cloth, vessels, and people. Food was only one part of making the hall ready to receive a meal. Salt on the table carried meaning too. Salt was valuable, and placement near or below the salt could mark rank in some later and traditional understandings, though practices varied. Whether or not a particular castle observed every custom in the same way, the broader point remains: table objects spoke. Bread, salt, cloth, cup, and portion all helped make hierarchy visible without a speech. Once food crossed into the hall, control partly left the kitchen. The cook could no longer adjust the sauce or warm the dish. Servers, officers, and diners shaped the next stage. This loss of control may be familiar to anyone who has made food for others. At some point the work must be released. The kitchen waits for response, but the dish now belongs to the table. A dish carried through a passage loses heat with every step. This simple fact shaped architecture and service. The medieval household did not have warming lamps or insulated carts. Speed, covered vessels, and good timing protected the cook's work on its journey to the table. The hall may have received the meal as if it were inevitable. That is the strange success of service. When everything works, the diners notice the food rather than the coordination. The kitchen disappears into accomplishment. There is a lovely moment just after dishes leave the kitchen, when the room holds the absence of what it has made. The board is marked with crumbs. The fire is still strong. The cook listens for a message from the hall. More sauce, more bread, another course, a delay, a compliment, a complaint. The kitchen is near the centre of the event, but not fully inside it. Its workers may hear the hum of voices, the scrape of benches, the swell of laughter, or the formal movement of service. They remain behind the door between labour and celebration. That distance gives the castle kitchen its slightly lonely quality. It feeds the hall but does not sit in it. It sends warmth outward and keeps the smoke for itself. A feast day begins long before the feast. It begins in orders, accounts, deliveries, and memory. Preserves may be prepared months ahead for great occasions. Animals may be selected, fish arranged, spices checked, flour measured, extra hands hired, and vessels cleaned with unusual care. The household asks more of every office. The pantry must provide bread and table linen. The buttery must have drink ready. The larder must release meat or fish in the proper amounts. The kitchen must sequence dishes so that the hall receives not a heap of food but an event. Even if we keep the tone quiet, we should understand the scale of preparation. A feast is not simply more food, it is organisation made visible. The cook on such a day is both craftsman and conductor. He may oversee roasting, boiling, baking, saucing and presentation, while other specialists handle their parts. Pies may be shaped and filled, broths may be strained, almonds may be ground for milk or paste. Spices may be measured carefully, because their cost makes waste painful. Sweet and savoury could appear in combinations that surprise modern palates. Dishes might be coloured, layered, or decorated. Some elite medieval feasts included subtleties, elaborate presentations made partly or wholly from sugar, pastry, or other materials designed to delight the eye and convey meaning. Not every castle feast reached royal extravagance, but even a smaller household could use food to honour guests and mark occasions. Pastry was especially useful in a large household. A pie could encase meat, fish, fruit, or spiced mixtures. Some crusts were intended more as containers than delicate modern pastry, though edible pastry also existed. The form protected, transported, and presented the filling. A pie could arrive at the hall as a sealed promise, opened at the table or served in portions. The pastry worker, like the baker, understood heat and structure. Too weak a case and the dish failed in the carrying. Too hard or thick and it became only a box. Skill lived in that balance. Feasts also depended on restraint, though that may seem surprising. An impressive household did not simply pour all supplies into one day without thought. Officers had to consider cost, future needs, guest rank, season, and reputation. Generosity was admired, but waste could be criticised. The beautiful table therefore rested on calculation. Behind abundance stood columns of numbers, remembered prices, counted loaves, and watched barrels. In this sense, the feast was both dream and ledger. The hall on a feast day may be the place of display, but the kitchen experiences the feast as heat and timing. More fires, more vessels, more washing, more people in the way, more instructions, more chances for something to be forgotten. And yet, within all that, there are quiet skills. A cook touching the crust of a pie to judge its strength, a servant counting dishes in a whisper, a sorcerer tasting one drop from a spoon, a baker listening to the hollow sound of a loaf, a butler checking whether the wine for important guests is ready. These details are less spectacular than the finished table, but they are where the feast becomes real. For cautious comparison, later Tudor Hampton Court shows how large and specialised royal food service could become, with historic royal palaces describing hundreds of staff and hundreds of meals produced daily for Henry VIII's court. A typical medieval castle kitchen was often smaller, but the comparison helps us imagine how elite households could turn cooking into a managed institution. The larger the household, the more the kitchen divided into departments. The more important the occasion, the more the meal depended on coordination. What looks like abundance from the hall looks like careful systems from the kitchen door. A feast also had emotional work to do. It welcomed, impressed, celebrated, reconciled, marked holy time, honoured rank, or remembered obligation. Food carried messages without needing words. A generous table said that the household was capable. A beautifully coloured dish said that the cook was skilled and the lord could afford skill. A rare spice said that the household's reach extended beyond local fields. Even in a calm telling, we can feel how much meaning a meal could bear. The feast day may also have brought extra watchers into the kitchen, messengers from the hall, officers checking progress, servants from other parts of the household, perhaps curious young people trying to glimpse special dishes before they disappeared. The kitchen's usual privacy thinned. Everyone depended on it, so everyone had reason to hover near it. That attention may have made the work more difficult. The cook needed focus, but the castle wanted reassurance. Musicians, guests, clerks, grooms, pages and officers might all be part of the wider feast day, but the kitchen heard them indirectly. A burst of laughter from the hall, a messenger arriving breathless, a request for another dish, the distant movement of benches. The kitchen remained partly outside the celebration it enabled, which is why its story feels both warm and solitary. Not every special dish was strange or grand. Sometimes distinction came from better flour, more careful seasoning, a finer wine, a sweeter sauce, or fruit served at just the right stage of ripeness. Luxury often lives in degrees. The medieval cook understood degrees, more or less heat, finer or coarser bread, thicker or thinner sauce, common or rare spice. Special occasions also required extra cleaning before they began. Vessels that might pass on an ordinary day needed more attention. Cloths had to be readied, floors had to be swept, serving items had to be found and counted. The beauty of a feast rests partly on work that makes dirt disappear. Cleanliness in a medieval context was not modern sterilization, but order, freshness, and presentability mattered deeply. The cook may have drawn on remembered patterns rather than improvising everything. A household often had customary ways to mark certain days, honour certain guests, or serve certain dishes in season. Tradition eased decision-making. It also comforted diners. A familiar feast dish returning at the proper time could make the year feel stable, like a song whose verses are known before they are sung. Children or younger servants might remember feast days most vividly through glimpses. A bright dish carried past, the smell of sugar, a forbidden taste, a larger fire than usual, the cook's sharper voice, a late hour, a tired adult handing them a crust. Such memories, if they survived in the mind, would not necessarily become written history, but they would shape how a person remembered childhood, service, and the great house. When the feast ended, the household's reputation had been renewed or tested. Guests carried impressions away. The lord's generosity, the lady's household management, the cook's skill, the steward's order, the servant's discipline, all could be judged through the meal. The kitchen's labour therefore travelled outward in stories told elsewhere. A dish vanished when eaten, but its impression could last. On a feast day, the kitchen's memory of previous feasts mattered. Which dish pleased the guest last time? Which route became too crowded? Which oven ran too hot? Which helper could be trusted with a delicate task? Experience was stored not only in records but in people. The most ornate dish still depended on basics. A spectacular presentation could fail if the bread was late, the fire poor, the vessel missing, or the sauce thin. Grandeur rested on humble competence. That is why the feast belongs to the whole kitchen, not only to the most skilled cook. By evening the feast changes character. The dishes have gone out. Some return half empty. Some are scraped clean. Platters are stacked. Cups are gathered. Trenchers and leftovers are sorted according to custom. The kitchen that was full of urgency becomes full of residue. Spilled ale, crumbs, bones, wilted herbs, cooling fat, wet cloth, tired hands. This aftermath is also part of the feast. Celebration leaves work behind it. The scullion knows this better than anyone. But there may be satisfaction too, a weary knowledge that the household was honoured, the guests fed, the courses delivered, and the day completed. The feast is remembered in the hall, but it is endured and accomplished in the kitchen. A medieval kitchen lived by the year. Spring entered first through small greens, herbs, young animals, lighter days, and the relief of surviving winter stores. The garden mattered. Even a castle that bought costly spices could still depend on humble leaves from nearby beds. Parsley, sage, mint, leeks, onions, garlic, and other plants that brought freshness after months of preserved food. Eggs and dairy might become more available in certain seasons, though religious restrictions could affect their use. The kitchen felt these changes in texture and scent. After winter's salted fish, dried peas, stored grain, and hard cheese, a handful of fresh herbs could feel like a quiet festival. Summer brought abundance, but also danger of spoilage. Without modern refrigeration, heat changed everything. Fresh meat and fish required speed, preservation, or careful storage. Milk soured quickly, fruits ripened and passed. Flies and damp could trouble the kitchen. Cool rooms, shaded courts, stone storage, running water where available, salting, drying, and prompt cooking all helped. Work might begin early to avoid the worst heat. The kitchen garden could be generous with herbs and vegetables. Orchards might begin to offer fruit. Fish from ponds, rivers, or trade routes might arrive in different condition depending on distance and weather. Summer was not simply ease, it was abundance that had to be managed before it slipped away. The kitchen garden deserves a slower look. It was not always arranged like a modern decorative garden, though beauty and utility could meet. Beds might hold herbs for cooking and healing, vegetables for pottage, and plants valued for scent or household use. The garden connected the kitchen to women and men whose labour is even less visible than the cooks. Gardeners, weeders, carriers, children sent to gather leaves, servants who knew which plant was wanted and which should be avoided. A source begins long before the mortar. It begins in soil. Markets and estate networks widened the seasons. A castle might draw from its own demesne lands, tenant obligations, local markets, rights to fisheries, mills, dovecotes, orchards, warrens, and hunting grounds. Imported goods arrived through merchants. The kitchen therefore sat at the meeting point of local and distant economies. A bowl on the table might contain peas from nearby fields, pepper from far away, salt from trade, and herbs from just outside the wall. Medieval food was both rooted and connected. Autumn was the season of gathering and calculation. Grain harvests shaped bread. Apples and pears could be stored, dried, cooked, or pressed. Nuts might be collected. Animals could be slaughtered and preserved before winter, especially if keeping them through the cold months would cost too much feed. Barrels, sacks, crocks, hooks, shelves, and bins became the architecture of survival. A good autumn filled the kitchen's future. A poor one cast a long shadow. In a castle, wealth softened hardship, but it did not make the household independent of weather. Rain, harvest failure, animal disease, disrupted trade, or local unrest could all affect supplies. The kitchen was where broad conditions became immediate questions. How much flour? How much salt fish? How many barrels? How many mouths? Winter narrowed the world. Fresh food became scarcer. Salted meat, dried fish, stored grain, peas, beans, onions, leeks, preserved fruit, hard cheese, and ale carried the household. English heritage notes that in winter, without refrigeration, there was little fresh food, and sauces could enliven meals of salted meat or fish. This is where the sorcerer's art mattered in a very practical way. A sharp sauce, a warm spice, a little sweetness, or a bright herb if one could be found might transform repetition into comfort. The kitchen fire also changed in meaning. It was no longer only a tool for cooking. It was one of the castle's sources of bodily reassurance. Workers might still be cold at the edges of the room, but near the hearth there was light, work, and heat. Winter didn't mean silence outside the kitchen. It meant different sounds, harder footsteps on frozen ground, the crack of wood, the dull thud of stored roots, the creak of barrels, the flap of a door in wind. The kitchen gathered these sounds into warmth. A pot on the fire in winter carries more emotional weight than the same pot in summer. It says that the household is still holding together, that stores remain, that someone planned ahead, That morning labour continues despite the cold. Spring, by contrast, could feel like permission. A few fresh leaves, the lengthening light, and the softening ground change the cook's possibilities. We should not imagine medieval people as constantly poetic about seasons, but they lived close enough to scarcity that change must have been felt. The first tender herbs after winter were not merely ingredients, they were signs. The kitchen, more than many rooms, knew how to read them. The year also affected the workers' bodies. Summer heat near the hearth could be exhausting. Winter water could numb hands. Autumn abundance meant long hours of preserving and storing. Spring might bring relief, but also fresh demands. The kitchen calendar was therefore not only a list of ingredients, it was a calendar of fatigue, comfort, and changing kinds of labour. In winter, the kitchen may have been one of the few places where the day felt fully awake. Other rooms could be dim and cold, but the kitchen had flame by necessity. That did not make it comfortable in every corner, yet it made it alive. A person passing the doorway might feel heat on the face and smell supper long before entering the hall. Seasonal preserving was also a way of moving time. Summer fruit could become a winter memory in a preserve. Autumn slaughter could become meat for colder weeks. Herbs could be dried for days when the garden slept. Fish caught far away could appear at an inland table after drying or salting. The kitchen stretched moments across months. It made June speak in January and autumn answer Lent. The garden in summer may have been full of bees, damp leaves, and the practical beauty of plants grown for use. A servant sent to gather herbs would know that freshness fades quickly after cutting. Leaves bruise, stems wilt. The path from garden to mortar had its own urgency. Even the gentlest ingredients demanded timing. A green sauce begins losing itself the moment the leaves are picked. Autumn's work could be satisfying in a heavy way. Full bins and barrels reassured the household. Smoke houses, salting tubs, drying racks, and storage rooms turned labour into security. The smell of apples, grain dust, malt, smoke, and new stores might fill the working areas. Autumn abundance was not leisurely. It was abundance under instruction. Preserve this. Count that. Do not waste the good weather. Winter is coming. The church calendar overlaid the agricultural year. A season was not only spring or winter. It could be Lent, Eastertide, Advent, Christmas, a saint's day, a vigil, a local observance. The kitchen had to translate sacred time into menus. This gave the year a layered rhythm. Weather told one story, fields another, and the church another. The cook listened to all three. The kitchen knew darkness as part of the year. Winter shortened working light and made fire more precious. Summer stretched evenings and changed the pace of cooling. The same task performed in June and December could feel like two different kinds of labour. Seasonal change also affected the listener's imagined colours. Spring green, summer gold, autumn brown and red, winter grey and white. All entered the kitchen through food and weather. The room may have been smoke dark, but the year still painted it. The year moved through the kitchen in practical colours. Green herbs, pale flour, red apples, yellow fat, white salt, dark ale, silver fish, brown bread. Even without paintings on the wall, the room was never colourless. Seasonality also shaped mood. In spring, the kitchen may feel expectant. In summer, hurried and fragrant. In autumn, busy with preparation. In winter, inward and smoky. A long-form sleep story can rest here because seasonal rhythm is one of history's oldest lullabies. Before clocks ruled every minute, the year ruled the table. People watched the sky, the road, the garden, the stores, the river, the market, and the church calendar. The kitchen gathered all those signals and turned them into meals. What seems like a simple bowl or loaf carries the whole year within it. Seed, rain, harvest, grinding, storing, kneading, baking, serving, and finally the quiet moment when someone eats and is warmed. After supper, the kitchen becomes another place. The urgency of service fades, and the room enters its second labour. Pots must be emptied, boards must be scraped, knives must be accounted for, cloths must be rinsed or set aside, ash must be managed. Vessels must be washed in the scullery or near it, depending on arrangement. The work is less dramatic than roasting or plating, but it is essential. A kitchen not cleaned at night punishes the next morning. Grease hardens, smells deepen, pests are invited, tools vanish, disorder multiplies. So the tired household servants must turn again to water, scraping, wiping, stacking and carrying. The scullion's world is especially vivid in the evening. Wet sleeves, reddened hands, heavy pots, cloudy water, the dull shine of cleaned metal, the scrape of residue from wood or pottery. It is not glamorous work, and it was likely among the least honoured. Yet it required knowledge. A fragile vessel cannot be handled like an iron pot. A sharp knife cannot be thrown carelessly among bowls. Fat may be saved, strained, reused, or set aside for candle making. Ash may help clean, or may need removing. Bones and scraps may be sorted. What is waste in one context is useful in another. Medieval households were often careful with materials because materials represented labour. Even leftovers had destinations. Night work changes the sound of a kitchen. Earlier the room is full of commands and overlapping tasks. Later sounds separate. One pot being set down, one broom against stone, one bucket emptied, one bar lowered across a door. The quiet makes the day's labour more visible. You can almost count the actions because nothing hides them now. In that slow aftermath, the room becomes suitable for sleep storytelling. The heat is fading. The mind can follow one task at a time. There may also be a small moment of food for the workers themselves. Customs varied, and portions depended on rank and household practice, but those who cooked and served also had to eat. Perhaps they received bread, pottage, ale, leftovers, or assigned portions. The timing might be awkward after others were fed. Still, there is something tender in imagining the exhausted kitchen workers finally sitting, even briefly, near the warmth they have maintained all day. Not at the high table, perhaps not even in the hall, but with enough quiet to swallow, breathe, and feel the weight of the day settle. Counting belonged to the end of the day. In a large household, accountability mattered. Knives, spoons, vessels, linens, and stores could not simply disappear. Officers might inspect or record. Doors might be locked. English heritage's note about kitchens being locked at night to prevent servants stealing fat reveals a small tension inside the household. The people who produced and handled food did not necessarily have free claim to it. The kitchen was warm, fragrant, and full of temptation, but it was also regulated. A servant might be surrounded all day by food and still remain hungry for something richer than his allotted portion. This is part of the slight loneliness of the kitchen, nearness without ownership. The fire is banked again. This is one of the loveliest images in the whole day. The same hearth that was woken before dawn is now being prepared for sleep. Embers are gathered and covered with ash, not extinguished entirely if they can be preserved. Tools are drawn away from heat. The floor is checked for sparks. A final bucket of water may be placed where it is needed. The cook or a trusted servant looks once more around the room. Is the pot safe? Is the door secure? Are the stores closed? Has anything been left where mice can find it? The kitchen settles by degrees. Heat remains in the stones. Smoke thins. The room that fed the castle becomes almost empty. The last light in the room might come from more than one source. Embers in the hearth, a candle in a niche, a rushlight near the washing, perhaps moonlight at a high opening. These lights do not fill the room evenly. They leave corners in shadow and make familiar objects appear larger or softer than they did at noon. A hanging ladle becomes a dark curve. A pot becomes a low shape. A stack of bowls becomes a small tower. The kitchen at night is half practical space, half dream. The person who locks the kitchen also locks away the day's smells. Smoke remains, of course, and fat, and bread, and damp stone. In the morning, when the door opens again, those smells will greet the first servant like an old sentence continuing after a pause. The kitchen is never entirely new. It carries yesterday into today, just as the banked ember carries fire through darkness. When the door closes, the kitchen is not empty of meaning. It is full of readiness. Tools are where they should be. Fuel waits. Water vessels may be set for morning. The fire is hidden but not gone. A well-closed kitchen is a promise that the next day will not begin in confusion. Order is a form of rest. The last servant's tiredness is part of the room's truth. Sleep history should not erase labour, but it can hold labour gently. We can acknowledge the ache in the hands without dwelling harshly on it. We can let the worker finish, breathe, and step away into the passage. The story honours the work by allowing it to end. Ash disposal was another quiet responsibility. Too much ash choked the hearth. Careless ash could carry hidden heat where it was not wanted. The worker had to know what was dead ash and what still held life. That distinction has a poetic softness now, but it was practical then. In the kitchen, sleep and danger could look alike under grey powder. Carefulness ended the day safely. The kitchen animals, if any hovered nearby, knew the aftermath too. Dogs might hope for scraps, cats might watch corners, stable or yard animals might receive waste in certain forms. Not every castle permitted animals freely in working spaces, and practices varied, but food attracts life. The kitchen's leftovers connected human meals to the wider household ecology. Nothing edible remained merely neutral for long. The final washing may have been accompanied by few words. Tired people often speak less. The rhythm of work becomes enough. Dip, scrub, rinse, stack. Dip, scrub, rinse, stack. Repetition can be a burden while one performs it, yet from the distance of a bedtime story it becomes soothing. We can hear the pattern without feeling the ache. We can honour the ache without carrying it into sleep. When the door is barred, the castle kitchen becomes a sealed container of warmth, scent, and readiness. The workers step away into cooler corridors. The darkness inside is not empty. It has structure. Hearth there, oven there, boards there, hooks there, stores behind doors. Morning will find everything waiting. A good night in the kitchen is not dramatic. It is simply orderly enough to begin again. There is peace in a surface cleared after long use. The board still bears knife marks, but it is ready. The floor still remembers footsteps, but it is swept. The pot still smells faintly of food, but it is empty. Rest often comes not from perfection, but from enough order for tomorrow. The kitchen's final silence is different from its morning silence. Morning silence waits to be filled. Night silence has been earned. It carries the memory of voices, heat, movement, and service, all slowly settling into the stones. The old kitchen's rest is never absolute, because its purpose waits inside it. The hearth will be opened again, the boards marked again, the water clouded again, and the same walls will hold another day's smoke. That expectation is not restless tonight. It is reassuring. Some rooms are made to begin again, and this is one of them. Outside, night has returned. The hall is quieter now. The Lord's chamber may have a light. A guard walks. Somewhere a horse shifts. In the kitchen, the last worker may pause before closing the door, not from sentiment perhaps, but from tired habit. Still, we can lend the moment a gentleness. The day has been long. The hands are sore. the clothes smell of smoke, but the household has eaten. Bread was baked, pots were filled, fires were kept. The kitchen has done what it exists to do. The door closes, and behind it the banked embers glow under ash like a memory waiting for morning. When we think of castles, we often imagine towers against the sky, banners in the hall, stone stairways, guarded gates, or rooms where powerful people made decisions. But tonight we have stayed mostly below that level of display. We have followed the quieter engine of the household, the kitchen that woke before dawn and slept after nearly everyone else. It was not an easy place, and we should not pretend that it was. It was hot, smoky, demanding and ordered by rank. Yet it was also a place of skill, rhythm, memory and care. The castle's public life depended on its hidden labour. Every formal meal, every act of hospitality, every fasting day properly observed, every winter supper, every loaf set before a servant, and every fragrant dish carried to the high table began in practical human work. There is comfort in remembering the ordinary people of the kitchen, even when we do not know their names. The cook judging heat by sight, the baker waking flour into bread, the scullion washing a pot in cold water, the sorcerer grinding spice in a mortar, the pantler counting loaves, the butler drawing ale, the young helper turning a spit and trying not to drift into sleep. They lived in a world very different from ours, but some of their gestures are still recognisable. To feed others is still to measure time. To clean after a meal is still to close a small chapter of the day. To bank a fire, whether real or imagined, is still to trust that morning will come. If the stones of an old castle could remember warmth, they might remember the kitchen best. Towers remember weather, chapels remember prayer, halls remember voices, kitchens remember the daily human need that no rank can escape. Everyone, from the highest noble to the youngest servant, lived because food came from somewhere and someone prepared it. That shared dependence does not erase hierarchy, but it does remind us of a common body beneath social difference. Hunger, warmth, fatigue, thirst, taste, and sleep belong to all centuries. So the kitchen leaves us with a gentler kind of history. Not the history of a single dramatic date, but the history of repeated mornings. The fire woken, the dough shaped, the pot stirred, the fish soaked, the sauce strained, the hall served, the vessels washed, the embers covered, again and again. A life can be made from such repetitions. A household can be held together by them, and a listener centuries later can rest inside their rhythm for a while. The quiet world of a medieval castle kitchen was never fully quiet while it worked. But now, in the last part of our story, it can be quiet. The boards are clean, the vessels are stacked, the larder is closed, the pantry is still, the buttery sleeps with its barrels, the oven mouth is dark, the hearth holds only a hidden red glow beneath its ash. Beyond the wall, the night air cools the yard. Above, the castle's stones lose the heat of the day. In the hall, the rushes are still. The household has disappeared into sleep one person at a time. And perhaps that is why a kitchen makes such a good place to end a sleep history. It does not ask us to solve a mystery or choose a side. It asks us to notice the work that keeps life going. It asks us to slow down enough to hear water poured into a tub, grain falling into a bin, the soft push of ash over an ember. These are gentle sounds, and they belong to no single century. They are part of the deep human background. Now the old castle can recede. The kitchen door is closed, the hall is dark, the yard is empty. The stars, if the clouds allow them, hang over the roofline. Beneath ash the ember waits. Beneath blankets the household sleeps. And here, in our own time, the listener may sleep too. Sleep now can borrow that order. Let the tools be hung. Let the bread be counted. Let the barrels rest. Let the old worker's footsteps fade down the passage. the story does not need to continue into another event. It can end exactly where a long day ends, with warmth saved under ash and the world made ready for morning. In the end, the castle kitchen is a reminder that survival is made from small continuities. Someone keeps the fire, someone carries water, someone remembers the bread, someone closes the door. History often turns on such uncelebrated acts, repeated until they become almost invisible. Tonight, we've made them visible for a while, and now we can let them fade softly back into the dark. Perhaps the reason this world feels slightly lonely is that so much of its care moved outward and away. The kitchen warmed others, fed others, honoured others, and then cleaned up after others. Its workers may have received little memory in return, yet tonight, for a while, we have returned memory to the room itself. We have let the hidden place become central. The castle kitchen also teaches that history is not only made by rare events, it is made by maintenance. Keeping a household alive is maintenance. Preserving food is maintenance. Cleaning tools is maintenance. Training a young helper is maintenance. Banking a fire is maintenance. These acts do not always appear heroic, but they are the conditions that allow any other story to happen. As you drift, you might picture one object from the room and let it stay with you. A wooden bowl, a rounded loaf, a quiet barrel, a mortar dusted with spice, a bucket beside the hearth, a door latch cooling under the night air. One object is enough. Through it, the whole kitchen can remain nearby without needing to be explained again. Now the old household is asleep. The cook has stopped giving orders. The scullion's hands are still. The baker's flour is covered. The larder is closed. The buttery is dark. The hall no longer waits for service. Under ash the ember is small and patient. It does not need our attention anymore. It will keep its own watch until morning. As the scene fades, it is enough to remember that people once stood where we have imagined them standing. They may not have thought their work poetic. They may have thought only of finishing. But time has softened the edges, and their ordinary finishing has become worthy of attention. Let the castle remain unfinished in the mind, as all true history is unfinished. We have not seen every room or known every name. We have only spent a long, quiet while near the hearth, and that is enough for tonight. And if sleep comes before the story's last word, that is perfectly in keeping with the room we have visited. The kitchen has always continued quietly whether or not anyone watched it. Let the ending become soft around you. So let the repeating work become a lullaby. Fire, water, bread, bowl, door, ember, sleep. Nothing more is required from the old room now, and nothing more is required from you. The castle kitchen fades now not because it is forgotten, but because its work is complete for the night. The warmth has been saved, the darkness has been accepted, and the old stones can keep their quiet watch until the first servant returns. And so we leave the kitchen as gently as we entered it. We do not need to open another door or ask another question tonight. The old room has given us enough. Bread, smoke, water, spice, season, labour, and the soft loneliness of work done out of sight. Let the embers stay covered. Let the pots rest. Let the castle grow dim around them. Wherever you are listening from, and whatever time it is in your part of the world, may your own room feel a little warmer and your thoughts a little quieter. Thank you for spending this slow journey in the castle kitchen. Rest well, breathe softly, and good night.
Thank you for watching Something About Sleep. Since you're clearly still awake, why don't you click on the next video and we'll see you there.